Hi, and welcome back to Stock Talk. This is Joe Rabil with Rabil Stock Research. So I wanted to answer a specific question that came through on ADX related to, I do a lot in terms of helping on the buy side, but I was going to do a lesson today on the sell side, giving you an idea of how ADX can help us find tops. So what we want to do here is identify and compare what's going on in price versus the ADX. We want to compare the peaks. And in so doing, we can be on the lookout for a couple of key things that need to take place when we're on the lookout for a reversal pattern to potentially to be developing. It's a little bit different than your standard divergence look. So that's one thing. And then the second thing we want to touch on is looking for a climax pattern. Once we're through with that, we'll go through the individual symbols that came through. Okay, so I've got my multiple time frames up on QQQ. Again, I use this as a lesson for last week. Using MACD, and now I'm going to use it for a lesson in ADX, which is nice. It means that I'm not having to go look around and I have to go through thousands of charts or hundreds of charts to try and identify the perfect example. It's all happening in one market, major market index. So what I do want to point out is that ADX, I think, can be very helpful in identifying both a market can top or bottom in two different ways. It can do it in a climax fashion, or it can do it in a divergent pattern, like where we get some kind of sign of momentum loss. We can top out that way, but we can also top out in some form of a climax. So we want to be on the lookout for both. I'm going to give you an example of each on this QQQ chart going back over the last few years. But I do like to look at the higher time frame. So it's developing, the two patterns have developed on a weekly chart, but I want to see what is taking place on the monthly before I'm looking for this exhaustion. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if the higher time frame is still showing, you know, a good overall pattern, then I don't necessarily want to be on the lookout for some kind of a big topping pattern on the lower time frame. But if I get extended, and if we look at what's happened here, this run from 2021, you see how we just never really pulled back towards the moving average. It just kept jetting away to the upside. When I see that, I want to start going to the smaller time frame and be on the lookout for signs of momentum loss or real divergence, because on this time frame we're not getting any real sign that things are slowing down. Strong ADX line, MACD is confirming all the way through the peak. Now, if we go to the weekly chart during that time, that would be during this run to the upside, and this follows the COVID low, right? We get a big move to the upside, we pull back. We're holding this 18-week area. I call it an area because we can bleed back through that line, but as long as it's rising, we still have a trend in place, especially when there's supporting evidence from a rising 40 underneath. Now, when we go and look at this, you can see what took place. The ADX was really strong in this period of middle of 2020. Really, right around the middle part of 2020, it started to confirm, and then it stayed strong all the way through the first quarter of 2021. And then we went through this consolidation phase, this sideways pattern, and ADX really dropped off a cliff here. You can see how it really started to show signs of slowing down. Well, when we made this next move to the upside, this is where we got to start watching for signs that the momentum, the strength of this move is really starting to die out. And we make a move to the upside, and if we compare and we look for a corresponding move in the ADX at this point, it does cross above the 25 line. I mean, the 25 line is telling us whether we have the ability to continue to trend or not. Now, I usually look at it like if it only makes it to 25, 26, or even 27, I'm still suspect, especially after we've had massive readings up near 50 like this. But this did reach the 30 level. Let's just see exactly what number it got to. It got up to right around 27, 28. I think that's good enough. And the way I do it, I look at it from a standpoint, is there any air between the the ADX? In fact, let's zero in on this. Is there any air between these two lines, right? I mean, if there's a little bit of air, then I would say that you could look for continuation. Now, when we get that, we want to just be aware of how we react from there. And we got a pullback again, pull back to the moving average, everything looks okay, and then we make another move to the upside. Now this time it makes even a lower peak, and I think we only get to 26 at this point, 26. So I know it does cross 25, but I'm looking at anything that's just barely above this 25 line. After showing strength to the upside, I'm thinking that there's enough deterioration in the momentum that we have to be on the lookout for a reversal taking place. Hopefully you can see the deterioration in the momentum compared to up here. These peaks are really, really strong, and then we drop off, and as we make new legs to the upside, we start to show a slowing and then even more weakening. Now we get a lot more confirmation after the red line starts to break out above 25. It didn't do that here, but it did it here. However, when we're up in this area near 400, remember the big round number. I talk about these big round numbers all the time. We always want to be watching to see how a market's reacting around these big round numbers like that. So I think this is a pretty key sign that that we should be on the lookout for a reversal. Now I'd go down to the daily chart and look for signs of a turnaround at this point. But I'm not going to go into that right this second. Let's just follow up with this. Now we make a decline, we make a move to the downside, and if you notice what takes place, the same thing that happened here at this peak is happening again at this bottom at the beginning of 2023. So we make a higher low here, but it's more like a test of the low. But look at how the ADX is really dropping off. It's made a big peak here. It was still strong here up in the 30s, but now we get down back to around 26 again. And after showing a lot of strength, we're showing a lot of deterioration in the momentum on the ADX. This is another exhaustion signal. So we're getting exhaustion signal here at the top and then an exhaustion signal here as it tests the low. I think these are really important keys because when I see this, I'm not necessarily just looking for a rally. When I get MACD divergence, I'm just thinking rally. But when I get a divergence like this, where the momentum has slowed right around the 25 line and then immediately fails underneath, just like it did here, I'm looking for more of a reversal of the trend. All right, now let's just go back real quickly and look at what took place here. If we look at 2019, we made these moves to the upside and then made a pretty strong move here. But if you notice, as this was trending to the upside, the ADX was not confirming. You see how this was moving up like this? And we never really got any confirmation in the ADX. It was just dying off. It shows that the trend strength was really not very good. And then, but the reality is we stayed above or held the 18 and the 40, and they kept trending to the upside. When we get divergence in an indicator, we always want to use price to confirm. But if you notice what the way this played out, it actually eventually showed a confirmation in the ADX. I view this more like a climax pattern because we're showing divergence and then we get one more push to the upside that convinces people that a new momentum is starting to kick in, and when in reality, it's really just a late climax pattern. Now, the way this turned around and with the COVID high and everything, it wasn't like there was a really great signal. Now, if you went down to the smaller time frames, you would have seen the same thing, an exhaustion pattern taking place, one of these taking place on the smaller time frames. But I just thought I'd point out what to look for. There's two different ways this can top. Climax, and that showed up here after divergence, or we just get momentum slowing as we're making higher highs in price. And it happened on the upside, and then it happened to the downside. So be on the lookout for these. I think these can be really helpful in all time frames. Use the higher time frame to help you determine whether you're getting kind of exhausted or extended, and then use this for signs of exhaustion. All right, let's move on to the individual stocks. If you're enjoying the content, hit that like button and also subscribe so you can be aware of any new content that's coming out from this channel. So just briefly, my services can be found at rabelstockresearch.com. My individual package has 2 to 3 reports each week, plus a special video for that package. I think the key thing to understand about what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to generate ideas for people, give you an idea on the market, show what sectors are doing what, but it's also two-pronged. I'm looking to really help from an educational standpoint, help you learn how to be your own trader. So that's the goal. A lot of education on there. Anyway, if you have an interest, you can go to the website, rabilstockresearch.com. Let's go ahead and get into the individual requests that came through. Okay, so now I've got my 5 charts up, and I still have the QQQ up. Before I get into the symbol requests that came through, let's just look at it now and look at it in terms of the lesson. And I think I'd focus in on the weekly chart and the daily. And if you look at the momentum condition in place on the weekly, it's not a divergence, it's showing momentum confirmation, and it's not any kind of an exhaustion signal or a climax signal at all. So we don't meet the requirements for looking for some kind of a quick or a sharp reversal on the weekly time frame. If we go to the daily time frame, we've got confirmation on a momentum basis here. Now it's gotten a little high. I mean, it's up near 50. It didn't quite make it to 50. So it maybe is a little mature, but we're still not showing signs of divergence here, and we're not showing any sign of a climax pattern because we have confirmation of the highs. So I wouldn't be looking for a really sharp pullback in the QQQ right this second. Now, we can get a pullback. What I'm suggesting to you is that we could pull back, but we probably lead to another test of the high, or going to another minor new high at this point is what I'd be looking for based on what the ADX is telling me and really what MACD is confirming. All right, let's go ahead and get into first of all, I want to talk about the DIA. This is going to be the index that I'm using this week. It has been lagging. So let's just look at this over here. This is the relative strength versus the S&P. Okay, this you can clearly see we've been trending lower basically since the beginning of the year. Now, what I would tell you is that you almost want to look at this like a price chart and say, you know what, we've made a pretty big move to the downside. We're getting kind of close to support. It's probably ready for some kind of a rally on a relative basis. But I don't know that I want to make any major commitments until I see a breakout above this trend line here. So if we can do that, if we can break out above this consolidation pattern, I could see some pretty good catch up on a relative basis, like improvement on a relative basis. We've got a pretty good looking pattern really that's been walking along the 18-month line. The MACD on the weekly has been skating along above the 0 line, and we have a low ADX condition in place. So breakout is the way to look at this. A move through 340 I think would be pretty bullish. Now, I got some requests regarding mega cap names. All right. And what I want to do is I want to show you a couple of examples of what I think is really important to be on the lookout for in some of these stocks that have made big moves. So let's go back and look at United Rentals. This was a stock that made a beautiful breakout here. Really strong move. Look at the confirming momentum condition in place. Now, I don't really want, what I want to do is buy a pullback. All right. When we get the move, when we get an extended run, when this starts to show signs of real strength, I'm looking to play a pullback. However, it is important. The quality of the pullback matters to me. How violent is that pullback? You can really see it on the daily chart over here. Look at the violence of this. Look at the gaps. Look at the big red bars. You can see it on the weekly. This is not what I'm looking for. I don't want to see a violent move to the downside. Now, I think ultimately this is going to form some kind of a trading range because there's massive support underneath. But when we get a violent move off the top, you kind of instantly create resistance overhead, and it ends up turning into some kind of a range pattern. So pullbacks, the quality of the pullback really matters to me, especially in a stock that's overbought. Let's just go and look at this really simply. When we were up at, at the peak here, the RSI 5 was up around 90 and it's actually starting to show signs of a divergence. But either way, when you get up near that 90 level from RSI 5, I'm looking for some kind of a pullback. And at that point, the pullback came in too hard. I'm not interested. Let's look at Amgen as another example. Beautiful breakout here, huge move. But then, and my subscribers know this, I was watching this and I'm thinking, this looks great. Let's see how it pulls back. Well, the pullback was too violent. It just came in way too hard. You can see the gap in there. By the time it got to support, it was just too strong to the downside. So I'm not interested in that either. And if you enter stocks the way I suggest using multiple time frames, you would have never really had a threat of being in this. If you do a single time frame approach, this breakout and pullback, you're getting long on this bar here. If you look at it from the way I do it, you would have never done that. You'd have been waiting for a pullback and then an up move back through here, and it never happened. You would have never gotten long. So that's the beauty of multiple time frames. I think that's a good thing to just note. Now, the major reason why I'm bringing this up is we start looking at stocks like Apple. We're up against the high, all right? We haven't actually broken out, although we've made a monster move to the upside. Look at the momentum condition in place in both MACD and ADX. Very, very strong. But I want to see the quality of the pullback. Are we going to get two monster red bars with gaps involved? If so, then we're probably forming a big trading range. All right. If it comes in orderly, then I'm interested. The best way I can explain this, I think, is you want to actually think about it. This is going to sound a little nuts, but I want you to think about it almost like a plane coming into land towards this moving average. If it's coming in like this, it's almost like a plane that got shot down, right? And it's just coming straight down and flying down straight vertically towards the moving average. I'm not interested in that. I want something that has a little bit more of an angle, that it looks like it's landing towards this. It's more of a soft landing or flying by this. It might not actually touch it, but it's coming in at an angle of attack. It doesn't look like it's going to go breaking right through it. So that's what I'd be watching for here. How orderly is the pullback? I'm looking for an orderly pullback towards the moving average. If that happens, I'm a buyer. If it doesn't, then I think we're forming a huge trading range. Probably has a lot of support in the 160s or something like that, and it ends up not doing anything for now. So just be aware of that. The other thing is if you see this, you see how these lines are parallel? I mean, there's nothing wrong with this pattern right now if you wanted to try and play this off the daily. The reason why I wouldn't do that is because now we're up against the high. I mean, up until this point, you really haven't had that issue. Now we're up against the high. We tried to go to a new high. It looks like it might be running into some resistance for the first time. Okay, let's look at Google. Now, Google is the same idea, right? It's not up against its highs, but look at how it drove off the low. Look at the improvement in the momentum. I mean, these are really good signs in both Apple and Google. This is something you just have to respect. Now, we have a declining 18-month line. So what have I been saying? I've been saying this for a while. This is a trading move, and we're looking for some kind of a pullback to allow this 18-month to cup around. So again, does it come in violently? If it really hard, then we're probably forming a range, and we just made a peak at this key resistance zone, right? And we've got a huge amount of support underneath, and we'll probably form some kind of a range. If we come in an orderly fashion, then we want to be a buyer. All right, you got to be prepared for this. We don't know what's going to happen. It's not really worth me predicting. I don't even need to predict. All I have to do is watch the quality of the pullback. I can look at the ADX strength on the daily to tell me whether the pullback is hard or not. These are the types of things I'd be watching for in these stocks and determining whether it's a viable pullback or whether we're making some kind of an interim peak and we're going to form some kind of a trading range. So let's look at Adobe here. I actually think this is a little bit more interesting, and let me just explain why. So we've broken the downtrend. We went sideways for a while. Now we've got this little low ADX breakout taking place. Now I'd love to see a little dip in this, but I think there's more room to play. If you look at this, this has a declining 18-month, but it really hasn't made an extended move like Google did or Apple did. It hasn't really made a big run here. I think this still has potential as a trading play. If we can get a pullback, it's a trading play for sure, because we're fighting a declining 18-month line. But I could see this pulling back and going another leg for sure. So I don't see this. I mean, it's the same concept though. If the pullback is really hard, too violent, then you never get in. Let's go ahead and look at Netflix. So Netflix had this big move to the upside, ran into the 18-month, and then pulled back. Now, this is a fairly orderly pullback. Let's just look at this a little bit more closely. I think this was a fairly orderly pullback. The problem wasn't the slope of the pullback. It wasn't vertical, right? The problem was it overran the 18. So when that happened, then we're looking for a move up to about the 50%, and then we look for the higher low. That's exactly what's taken place here. We had reverse divergence here, and now we're making another move to the upside. We're getting a little bit of improvement. The problem I've got with this is that we haven't gotten the ADX going on the weekly. And so we got to be on the lookout for a better test on the monthly. The 18-month line has not really been tested. We had one little sidebar, and now we've taken off again. We're starting to run into resistance from the 40-month moving average. So I still think at some point we're going to get some kind of a pause or a pullback that's a little bit more extensive and allows the 18-month to cup around. But, you know, the reality is we did go through a consolidation recently, and the weekly and daily are trending back to the upside. Look at the momentum condition on the daily chart. Really good, confirmed by MACD. Okay, let's go ahead and get into a couple other requests. BN. Now, the question here is this a potential short? And I see the trend to the downside. Definitely have rolled this over, right? We definitely have a trend on the downside here on the weekly chart. No question about that. What I start to look at, though, is here's the breakdown, essentially. We break down, and then we rally up, break down, and then we've rallied up 2 or 3 times. In fact, this is 3 or 4 times now. But when I start to see, here's one leg down. So here's the first initial leg, right? Here's 2. Here's 3. It doesn't quite make it to a new low. And then we finally get down, and really down around the 3rd or 4th leg, there's 0 follow through. Do you see this? There's no follow through in this breakdown. When I see that after it's gone through a couple declines already, I'm on the lookout for a move back to the upside. So I kind of view this like an undercut pattern that is now testing support at 30. And it almost looks like an opposing trend pattern developing to go back to the upside, maybe for a better test of the 18-month or something like that. So that's what I'd be on the lookout for whenever I see a new low after an extended move to the downside that has no follow through. I'm thinking we're going back up to resistance. So that's kind of my target area for this pattern right now. A lot of support when you go back and look on the monthly. This is a pretty big support zone at 30. Okay, Royal Bank of Canada. So this is a tough one. I mean, this stock held up really well versus most of the banks until recently it kind of sold off here. I still think there's a huge amount of support nearby. I don't think there's a lot of downside to it. I see this more like a potential trading play. The reason why I'd question that as a downside play here is because we're starting to get some rallies in some of these regional banks. Now, maybe because this is played out a little bit differently than the other banks and we're seeing weakness here, we can get another leg here, even if some of the U.S. regionals do rally from here. Just realize you're kind of dealing with a tight window. We don't have a huge window to play. I do not mind the look of this. And if you're selling calls, which is what the person asked, I mean, I have a problem with that. You just have to be careful about the timing on that. Okay, let's look at Dox, a name we haven't talked about in quite a while. I think we can focus in on the weekly chart because this is, if you go and you think about the Marty Zwag, cycle work, right? We've gone through a stage 4 decline, and now we're in a stage 1 base. And I think this is a late stage 1 base. We're forming this base, we're getting down to a point now where I'm looking for some strength to come through to the upside, right? I mean, we want to get a little bit of an up move here to get things going. It's low ADX condition, right? So I think if we can break out through this is something I want to collect stocks like this that have this pattern in place and just be patient and wait. Let's see if we can get something that looks pretty dynamic. Okay, BLDR. So look at the pullback to the 18-month line. And it was a fairly orderly pullback, but there was overrun, so it needed to come up, come back down, and then turn back up. And if you look at it on a weekly chart, there's no buy here because we were up 5 or 6 weeks in a row. So you're not taking this trend line break. because there was overrun. We had enough reason to wait, and then the pullback was pretty harsh. So then we come back up. This right at the beginning of the year, we get a pretty good looking signal across the board after breaking a new trend line. We get a little pinch play there. That's really the signal to get long. Now we've made this big run. Do we have any signs of climax here? No. Do we have any signs of momentum divergence or anything? Well, for the first time, we're starting to see that in both MACD and ADX. So I think we need to be on the lookout here. Because this is confirming, I'd be looking for a pullback back towards the 18-week. I think we're going to break this. I think this is not going to hold. If we do turn down from here, I think we're going to break the 18 and go through a real correction in this chart. So just kind of use each time frame and look at the momentum to determine what you want to do. Sorry, we've run out of time. Thanks for joining me. My contact information is listed. If you have any stock requests, send them to stocktalk@stockcharts.com. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.